Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The steady tap of Asher's fingers on his keyboard filled the home office, accompanied by the soft whir of his laptop fan. His eyes darted between multiple screens displaying investment portfolios and market trends. A notification popped up, another successful transaction. He allowed himself a small smile as he updated his private spreadsheet, watching the numbers climb steadily higher. $500,000. Not bad for someone his wife thought was going nowhere in life. The sharp click of heels against hardwood announced Sloane's approach before she appeared in the doorway. Her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around the door frame as she leaned in, her expression already set in its familiar mask of disapproval. "Still playing on your computer?" Her voice dripped with disdain. "I thought maybe you'd be doing something productive for once." Asher's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "I'm working, Sloane, just like I do every day." She stepped into the office, designer dress swishing around her knees. "Working? Please. I saw Marcus's new Tesla today. His wife was telling me how he just made senior partner at his firm." She picked up a stack of papers from his desk, flipping through them dismissively before dropping them back down. "Meanwhile, you sit here all day with your little consulting business that barely pays our bills." "The bills are paid, aren't they?" Asher turned to face her fully. "We have everything we need. Everything we need." Sloane laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Look at this house. It's half the size of what my sister has. I'm still driving a 3-year-old car. God, even your clothes?" She gestured at his simple button-down shirt. "You look like you shop at outlet stores." The argument was familiar, a well-worn path they'd traveled countless times before. Asher glanced at his secondary monitor, where another investment alert flashed quietly. Another 5-figure gain, invisible to his wife's materialistic gaze. "There's nothing wrong with being practical with money," he said, closing the investment window before she could see it. "Practical?" She spat the word like it was poison. "Is that what you call having no ambition? No drive?" Later that evening, Asher sat alone in his office, reviewing his latest investment returns. The fight with Sloane had been particularly bitter, but it had only strengthened his resolve. He pulled up another spreadsheet, this one tracking a series of strategic investments he'd made in emerging tech companies. The numbers told a story Sloane couldn't or wouldn't understand. His phone buzzed with a message from a client. Market analysis was spot on. Made a 40% return. Same time next quarter. Asher typed a quick response, then leaned back in his chair. Through the window, he could see Sloane in the driveway, climbing in her car dressed to kill, as usual. Probably heading to another social event he'd been deemed too boring to attend. The next morning brought another confrontation over breakfast. Sloane stood at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone while her coffee grew cold. "The Hendersons just bought a vacation home in Aspen," she announced, her voice tight with envy. "Everyone's moving forward except us, Asher. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is when people ask what my husband does, and I have to explain your little home office setup?" Asher spread butter on his toast, maintaining his composure. "And what exactly do you think I do all day, Sloane?" "Oh, please. I see the bank statements. Your consulting barely keeps us afloat." She set her phone down with enough force to make the counter shake. "I married you because I thought you had potential. Instead, you're content to hide behind your computers while everyone else actually makes something of themselves." "Money isn't everything," Asher said quietly, though he knew the words would fall on deaf ears. "Says the man who has none." Sloane grabbed her purse from the counter. "I'm having lunch with Kellen today. At least he understands ambition." The mention of his best friend's name sent a familiar twist through Asher's gut. Kellen had been spending more and more time with Sloane lately, always ready with an invitation to some exclusive restaurant or high-end social event. After Sloane left, Asher returned to his office. He pulled up his main investment portfolio, the one he kept carefully hidden from his wife's prying eyes. The numbers had grown significantly over the past year, approaching 600,000 now. He'd made another smart play in the tech sector, recognizing a pattern others had missed. That a text from Kellen lit up his phone. "Taking your girl to Morton's. You should learn to treat her right, man." Asher's finger hovered over the reply button, but he set the phone aside instead. Let them think what they wanted. He had work to do. The pattern continued for weeks. Sloane's criticism grew sharper, her absences more frequent. She filled their house with sighs of disappointment and barely concealed disgust. Each barbed comment about his lack of ambition, each comparison to their more ostentatious friends Asher, channeled it all into motivation. Making shrewder investments and expanding his consulting business far beyond what she imagined. One evening, he overheard her on the phone in the garden, her voice carrying through the open window. "I can't take it anymore," she was saying, presumably to one of her friends. "He has no ambition, no drive. It's like living with a ghost. Kellen says—" She lowered her voice, but Asher could still hear the smile in her words. "Kellen says I deserve better. And you know what? He's right." Asher turned back to his computer, pulling up another investment opportunity he'd been tracking. The familiar numbers were a comfort, solid and real. While Sloane plotted her escape from what she saw as a mediocre life, he was quietly building an empire that night, lying in their bed with an ocean of cold space between them. Asher listened to Sloane's breathing and knew their marriage was over. Not because of her criticism or her materialistic demands, but because she'd never bothered to see who he really was. She'd created an image of him in her mind, small, unambitious, weak, and had become so invested in that fiction that she'd missed the truth entirely. The next morning, he made 2 calls. One to his investment broker, moving another substantial sum into a promising venture. The second to his lawyer, requesting a discreet meeting to discuss asset protection. The stage was set. Now he just had to wait for Sloane to make her move. The betrayal, when it finally came into the open, arrived on a quiet Tuesday evening. Asher had just closed a particularly successful deal, adding another $50,000 to his hidden portfolio, when Sloane walked into his office without knocking. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped and businesslike. She wore a new dress, one he hadn't bought her, and her makeup was perfect, as if she'd been preparing for this moment. Asher saved his work and turned to face her. "About? I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with finality. Asher had been expecting this, but the reality still felt like a punch to the gut. He studied his wife's face, searching for any trace of the woman he'd married 8 years ago. All he found was cold determination and barely concealed contempt. "Is it because of Kellen?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. To Sloane's perfectly painted lips curved into a smirk. "Kellen understands what I need. He has goals, ambition. He's not afraid to take risks and live life to the fullest." She held up her left hand, where a massive diamond ring sparkled on her finger. "He proposed last week. I said yes, of course." The betrayal burned like acid in his throat. His wife and his best friend, plotting behind his back, laughing at him while he worked tirelessly to build something real. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" Sloane's smile was cruel. "Long enough to know that Kellen is everything you're not. He's successful, ambitious, exciting. He knows how to make things happen instead of hiding behind a computer screen all day." The next morning, Asher received an email from Kellen. The subject line read, "Sorry, brother." The message itself was brief. "These things happen. You'll find someone more your speed. No hard feelings." Asher deleted the email without responding. He spent the morning on the phone with his lawyer, discussing strategies for protecting his assets during the divorce. By lunch, he had moved several large investments into secure, private accounts that Sloane had no knowledge of. That a week later, they met with their respective lawyers. Sloane's attorney, an aggressive young man in an expensive suit, laid out their demands. "Mrs. Davidson is seeking a fair division of assets," the lawyer began, shuffling through his papers. "Given the length of the marriage and her contributions to the household, I'll agree to whatever settlement she wants." Asher interrupted quietly. The lawyers exchanged glances. Sloane's smirk widened. "See? Even he knows he has nothing worth fighting for." If she only knew about the private accounts, the investments, the growing empire he'd created while she sneered at his work ethic. But he said nothing. Let her think what she wanted. Let her walk away believing she'd traded up. That evening, Asher sat in his office, reviewing his latest investment returns. His phone buzzed with a text from Kellen, taking Sloane to the new French place downtown. "Remember when you said you'd take her there someday? Guess I beat you to it, buddy." Asher's fingers tightened around the phone, but he kept his composure. He opened his investment app instead, checking the latest returns on his portfolio. The numbers were growing faster now. His careful planning starting to pay off in exponential ways. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Sloane was in a hurry to start her new life with Kellen, and Asher saw no reason to delay. Her lawyer pushed for a quick settlement, clearly expecting resistance that never came. "Mr. Davidson," the lawyer said during their final meeting, "my client is willing to be generous given the circumstances. She's asking for the house and half of your joint assets, which frankly aren't substantial." Asher sat quietly in his simple suit, letting them believe what they wanted about his finances. The joint accounts they knew about painted a picture of a moderately successful consultant, nothing more. His real wealth was carefully hidden in private accounts and investments that Sloane had never bothered to ask about. "I'm prepared to accept whatever settlement Mrs. Davidson thinks is fair," he said mildly. The lawyer blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. "Well, that's very reasonable of you. I'll have the papers drawn up immediately." As they left the lawyer's office, Sloane caught his arm. "You know, you're making this almost too easy. I expected more fight from you." Asher looked at her hand on his arm until she removed it. "What sort of fight about? You've made your choice. Don't be bitter, Asher. It's not attractive." She adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder. "Besides, Kellen and I will invite you to the wedding. It's the least we can do." "How generous of you." Her eyes narrowed at his tone. "You know, this is exactly why we didn't work out. You're so small. Everything about you is small. Your ambitions, your dreams, your whole outlook on life." She shook her head. "Kellen sees the bigger picture. He knows how to really live." Asher said nothing, but inside his resolve hardened. Let them have their moment. Let them think they'd won. The time would come when they'd learn exactly what they'd thrown away. The wedding invitation arrived 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Heavy cream-colored paper with gold foil accents, announcing the union of Sloane Davidson and Kellen Mitchell at the city's most exclusive venue. The reception promised to be the social event of the season. Asher placed the invitation on his desk and opened his laptop. Time to start the next phase of his plan. On his screen, a new investment opportunity glowed, a chance to nearly double his already substantial portfolio. His phone buzzed with a text from Kellen. "Hope you got the invitation, brother. No hard feelings, right? Will mean a lot to have you there." Asher deleted the message without responding. He pulled up his main investment account instead, checking the latest figures. His net worth had grown significantly in the months since Sloane had walked out. Every dollar was carefully hidden, protected by a web of shell companies and private accounts that his ex-wife's lawyer had never thought to look for through his various business contacts. Asher heard about the wedding preparations. Sloane had chosen a designer dress that cost more than most people's cars. Kellen had rented out the entire top floor of the city's finest hotel for the reception. They were spending money like water, determined to make their wedding the talk of the town. "Did you hear?" one of his clients mentioned during a meeting. "Kellen Mitchell just bought that new mansion in Highland Park. Must have cost a fortune." Asher nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Good for him. Your ex-wife must be thrilled." The client continued, then caught himself. "Sorry, I shouldn't have." "It's fine," Asher said, turning the conversation back to business. Now, about those market projections. That evening, alone in his new apartment, smaller than the house Sloane had gotten in the divorce, but perfect for his needs, Asher reviewed his latest acquisition. Another company was struggling, its stock price dropping. Soon, he would buy it for pennies on the dollar, restructure it, and add another substantial sum to his growing fortune. His phone lit up with an unexpected message from Sloane. "The house feels empty sometimes. Miss our talks occasionally. Hope you're doing well." Asher deleted the message without responding. He didn't need her false sympathy or her attempts to keep him as a backup plan. He had work to do, and revenge was a dish best served cold. The wedding photos flooded social media the following weekend. Sloane in her elaborate dress, Kellen in his designer tuxedo, both of them beaming at their lavish ceremony. The flower arrangements alone probably cost more than she thought he made in a month. Asher saved several of the photos to a folder on his computer. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of what they thought they'd taken from him, and what he would eventually take from them. His broker called with news about another investment opportunity. "It's risky," the man warned, "but the potential returns are enormous. Send me the details." Asher replied. He had learned long ago that the biggest rewards came to those who knew how to calculate risk properly. Sloane had always thought him risk-averse, too cautious to seize opportunity. She had no idea how wrong she was. Reports of Sloane and Kellen's honeymoon in the Maldives trickled back through their social circle. The private villa, the yacht rentals, the endless stream of social media posts showing them living the high life. Each photo was calculated to show the world how successful they were, how perfectly their new life together was unfolding. Asher watched it all from a distance, gathering information while appearing to retreat into obscurity. He drove the same reliable car, wore the same practical clothes, lived in his modest apartment. To anyone watching, he seemed like a man nursing his wounds, trying to rebuild a small life after losing everything. But in his home office, surrounded by screens showing market trends and investment portfolios, Asher was building something far different. Every night, he updated his spreadsheets and checked his accounts. The numbers kept climbing, far beyond what Sloane had ever imagined he was capable of achieving. More importantly, he was gathering information about Kellen's business deals, about their spending habits, about the mountain of debt they were accumulating in their quest to maintain appearances. Each piece of data was carefully filed away, building a picture that would prove useful in the future. One evening, as he was reviewing his latest investment returns, his phone buzzed with another text from Sloane. "Saw your old car outside that coffee shop today. You should really treat yourself better. Life's too short to live small." Asher's fingers tightened around the phone as he read the message. On his screen, his latest investment showed another substantial gain, pushing his net worth even higher. He deleted the message without responding, just as he had deleted all her previous attempts at contact. Through his business network, he heard about Kellen's latest ventures, the expensive risks he was taking, the corners he was cutting to maintain their lavish lifestyle. Kellen had always been flashy, more interested in appearing successful than building something sustainable. "You should see their new house," one of Asher's clients mentioned during a consultation. "Makes your old place look like a cottage. Must be killing you to see them living like that." Asher merely smiled and steered the conversation back to business. Let them think what they wanted. Let them believe he was the same quiet, unambitious man Sloane had walked away from. Their assumptions would make his eventual victory all the sweeter. In his apartment that night, Asher pulled up the latest financial reports on his computer. His investments were performing better than ever, each careful decision building upon the last. While Sloane and Kellen splashed their money around like water, he was creating something real, something lasting. He opened his private email account and found a message from his broker about a new opportunity. A struggling company was about to go under, its assets severely undervalued. With the right moves, he could acquire it for a fraction of its worth and turn it into another successful venture. This was what Sloane had never understood. True success wasn't about flash and show. It wasn't about impressing people at parties or driving the newest car. It was about patience, strategy, and the quiet accumulation of real power. Asher leaned back in his chair, looking at the city lights through his window. Somewhere out there, Sloane and Kellen were probably at another expensive restaurant, another exclusive club, spending money they didn't really have to maintain, an image they couldn't really afford. Let them enjoy it while it lasted. Their time would come. Opening his laptop again, Asher began working on his next investment strategy. The foundation of his plan was already laid. Now it was just a matter of patience, watching, waiting, and letting karma take its course. They thought they'd written the end of his story. They had no idea they were only at the beginning of his. 6 months into their marriage, the first cracks in Sloane and Kellen's perfect facade began to show. Asher noticed it during a chance encounter at Maxwell's, an upscale restaurant downtown where he was meeting a potential investor. Well, Kellen's voice boomed across the dining room. "Look who's here." Asher looked up to see Kellen approaching his table, Sloane trailing behind him. Kellen's designer suit couldn't quite hide the slight puffiness around his face, the hint of strain around his eyes. Sloane wore a new dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but her smile seemed forced. "Mind if we join you?" Kellen didn't wait for an answer, pulling out a chair. "We need to stop running into each other like strangers. We're all adults here, right?" "Actually, I'm waiting for someone," Asher said quietly. "Oh, come on." Kellen waved down a waiter. "Your mysterious meeting can wait." Bring us a bottle of the 82 Bordeaux, the expensive one. Sloane sat down, her eyes darting around the restaurant. Kellen, maybe we shouldn't. Shouldn't what? Kellen's voice had an edge to it. Shouldn't be friendly? Shouldn't show Asher here how well we're doing. The waiter returned with the wine. Kellen grabbed the bottle before it could be properly presented, pouring generous glasses for everyone. Asher noticed the slight tremor in his hand. A toast, Kellen declared, raising his glass. To success. Some of us just know how to grab it, right, buddy? Is that what you call it? Asher kept his voice neutral, studying his former friend's face. What else would you call it? Kellen gestured around them. Look at us, living the high life while you. Well, you're still you, aren't you? Sloane touched Kellen's arm. We should go. We have that thing. What thing? Kellen's smile didn't reach his eyes. The charity gala? The club opening? Hard to keep track of all our social obligations, isn't it, darling? Asher noticed the way Sloane's fingers tightened on her purse, the slight downturn of her mouth. Something was off in their perfect world. How's the new house? He asked mildly. Magnificent, Kellen replied too quickly. Everything Sloane deserves. Unlike that shoebox you kept her in. It's nice, Sloane added, but her voice lacked conviction. Nice. Kellen turned to her. It's more than nice. It's exactly what you wanted, isn't it? The best address, the best furnishings, the best of everything. Isn't that what you said you needed? The tension at the table was palpable. Asher's investor would be arriving soon, but this glimpse into their supposedly perfect life was too valuable to cut short. And the business? He asked. Still making those ambitious deals? Something flickered across Kellen's face. Better than ever. Some of us know how to take risks, make things happen. Not everyone's content to play it safe behind a computer screen. Kellen, Sloane's voice held a warning note. We should really go? Why? Kellen drained his wine glass and reached for the bottle again. Worried your ex might see something's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Is there, sweetheart? Of course not, she said quickly, but her eyes wouldn't meet either man's gaze. That Asher's phone buzzed. His investor had arrived. He stood, placing his unused napkin on the table. This has been illuminating, but my meeting's here. Running away already? Kellen's laugh was sharp. Some things never change, do they? Some things do, Asher replied quietly. More than you might think. As he walked away, he heard Kellen's voice rise slightly. What was that supposed to mean? And why are you looking at him like that? Asher met his investor at the bar, but he kept one eye on his former wife and friend. Their body language told a story their words tried to hide. The way Sloane leaned away from Kellen's increasingly animated gestures, the forced brightness of their laughter later that night. In his office, Asher pulled up his latest intelligence on Kellen's business dealings. The reports painted an interesting picture. Aggressive expansion, risky investments, mounting debts hidden under a veneer of success. Kellen was playing a dangerous game, using new loans to pay off old ones, burning through capital to maintain appearances that a text message lit up his phone. Sloane, sorry about tonight. Kellen's just been under a lot of pressure lately. Asher smiled grimly as he deleted the message. Pressure. She had no idea what real pressure felt like. But she would learn. They both would. He opened his laptop and began composing an email to his broker. It was time to start acquiring some of Kellen's debt. Quietly, carefully through various shell companies. Piece by piece, he would own their future without them even knowing it. The next morning brought news of another of Kellen's grand business ventures. He'd taken over a struggling tech startup, promising to turn it around through his innovative leadership. The business papers ate it up, praising his bold vision, but Asher saw what others missed. The company's fundamentals were weak, its technology outdated. Kellen was buying headlines, not value. And he was doing it with borrowed money, lots of it. A week later, Asher ran into Sloane at their old coffee shop. She was alone, staring into a cup of cooling coffee. Fancy meeting you here, he said. Keeping his voice neutral, she startled, then tried to compose herself. Asher, I was just thinking about the old days. Missing your mediocre life. The words were sharp, but his tone remained calm. I didn't mean... She paused, seemed to gather herself. We're very happy, you know. Kellen's doing amazing things. So I've heard. The papers love him. Yes, well, She twisted her wedding ring, the enormous diamond that had replaced the one he'd given her. Success comes with certain pressures. Does it? Asher ordered his coffee, noting how her eyes followed his movements. I wouldn't know about that. I'm still just, what did you call it? Playing with computers. I was wrong about some things, she said quietly. Were you? He picked up his coffee. Interesting that you're only realizing that now. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Asher, wait. Could we talk sometime? He looked back at her, saw the desperation she was trying to hide. We just did. Walking away, he could feel her eyes on him. Let her wonder. Let her worry. The cracks in her perfect new life were starting to show, and he had front row seats to watch it all crumble. The cracks in Kellen and Sloane's perfect life widened into chasms as summer turned to fall. Asher watched it happen through carefully placed contacts and strategic business moves, each piece of intelligence confirming what he'd already suspected. One rainy evening, his phone rang a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Davidson? The voice was professional, clipped. This is Marcus Weber from First Capital Bank. I'm calling about Mr. Mitchell's loan application. Asher leaned back in his chair. What about it? He listed you as a character reference. Said you two had several successful business ventures together. Did he now? Asher's voice remained neutral. Interesting, considering I haven't done business with him in over a year. A pause on the other end. I see. And these joint property developments he mentioned never happened. Asher pulled up his own records, where he'd been tracking Kellen's mounting debts. Mr. Weber, I suggest you look very carefully at the rest of his application. Later that night, his doorbell rang. Kellen stood there, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face flushed with anger or alcohol, possibly both. You son of a bitch, Kellen spat. You couldn't just stay quiet, could you? Asher stood in the doorway, blocking entry. Using my name for loan applications? That's bold. Even for you? I needed that loan. Kellen's voice echoed in the hallway. You have no idea what's at stake here. Actually, I do. Asher's calm seemed to infuriate Kellen further. Your tech company's bleeding money. The restaurant chain you invested in is 3 months behind on payments. Should I continue? Kellen's face paled slightly. How did you? I pay attention. Something you and Sloane never understood about me. Listen, Kellen's tone shifted, becoming wheedling. We could work something out. Like old times. You got money saved up, right? We could be partners. Asher's laugh was cold. Like you were my partner when you went after my wife? That was different. Sloane and I, we're meant for each other. You have to understand, I understand perfectly. Asher started to close the door. Good luck with the loan. Kellen's hand shot out, stopping the door. You smug bastard. You think you've got it all figured out? You think your little computer job makes you better than me? No, Kellen. Your actions do that all on their own. The next morning, Asher received a text from Sloane. Whatever Kellen said to you last night, he didn't mean it. We're just going through a rough patch. He was composing an email when his office door opened. His assistant looked concerned. Sir, Mrs. Mitchell is here to see you. Sloane swept in before he could respond. Looking immaculate as always, but there was a tightness around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. You have to help him, she said without preamble. Asher continued typing. I don't have to do anything. He's your friend. Was my friend. Asher finally looked up. Before he married my wife. Sloane sank into a chair, her composure cracking slightly. It's not what you think. The business problems, they're temporary. Kellen has plans. Kellen always has plans. Asher closed his laptop. Big ideas, bold moves, borrowed money. How's that working out? You don't understand. The pressure he's under. The expectations. Your expectations, you mean? Asher's voice was sharp. The constant demand for more, bigger, better? Sound familiar? Color rose in her cheeks. That's not fair. I never what? Never pushed for more? Never complained about living beneath your standards? He gestured around his office. Funny how my little computer job seems more appealing now that Kellen's empire is crumbling. I was wrong about you, she whispered. I see that now. No, you don't. Asher stood. You're just desperate. There's a difference. Please. Her voice cracked. If not for Kellen, then for me. For what we had nothing. The words fell like stones. You made that very clear when you walked away. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "You've changed?" "No, Sloan. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bothered to look past the surface." After she left, Asher pulled up his investment portfolio. Another notification showed a successful acquisition. He now owned a significant portion of Kellen's corporate debt through various shell companies. Soon, he'd own it all. That evening, he overheard a conversation at his regular restaurant. Two businessmen at the next table were discussing Kellen's latest venture. "Complete disaster," one said. "Stock's in free fall. Mitchell's trying to cover it with new investments, but heard his wife's spending hasn't slowed down, though," the other chuckled. "Saw her at Morton's last week, dropping 5 figures on dinner like it was nothing." Asher smiled into his coffee. The pieces were falling into place faster than he'd expected. Kellen's desperate attempts to maintain appearances were only accelerating his downfall. His phone buzzed with another text from Kellen. "We need to talk. Man to man. I can explain everything." Asher deleted the message without responding. Let them stew in their mounting desperation. Let them feel the walls closing in. His revenge wouldn't come from any direct action. It would come from simply letting their own choices catch up with them. Later that night, he received an email from his broker about Kellen's latest failed venture. The tech company was declaring bankruptcy, and the vultures were circling. Through his various shell companies, Asher was positioned to acquire the assets for pennies on the dollar. He opened his laptop and began composing a series of emails. The next phase of his plan was ready to begin. The final threads of Kellen and Sloane's perfect life began to unravel on a crisp autumn morning. Asher sat in his office, reviewing the latest reports when his phone lit up with a news alert. Tech innovator Kellen Mitchell's latest venture files for bankruptcy. Before he could finish reading, his phone rang. It was Kellen. "You're behind this, aren't you?" Kellen's voice was ragged. "Buying up my debt, pressuring my investors. Don't try to deny it." "Interesting theory." Asher kept his voice level. "Or maybe your business model of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul finally caught up with you. I had everything under control until what? Until someone started paying attention to the numbers instead of your empty promises." A sharp laugh from Kellen's end. "You think you're so clever with your computers and spreadsheets. You have no idea what it takes to really make it in this world." "Actually," Asher replied, "I think I do. How's that mansion payment looking this month?" Silence on the line. "Then, you smug bastard. You're enjoying this, aren't you? About as much as you enjoyed taking my wife." Later that afternoon, Asher's assistant interrupted his work. "Mr. Davidson, the bankruptcy trustees for Mitchell Enterprises are here to see you." Two men in serious suits entered his office, carrying thick folders. "Mr. Davidson," the older one began, "we understand you control several companies that hold significant portions of Mr. Mitchell's corporate debt." Asher nodded. "That's correct. We're here to discuss restructuring options." "There won't be any restructuring," Asher cut in smoothly. "My companies will be calling in those debts. All of them." The younger trustee shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, that would effectively force liquidation of all Mr. Mitchell's assets." "Yes," Asher smiled slightly. "It would." That evening, he received an unexpected visitor. Sloane stood at his door, her designer outfit slightly disheveled, her perfect makeup showing signs of wear. "How dare you," she hissed, pushing past him into the apartment. "Everything we've built, everything we've worked for, everything you stole, you mean?" Asher closed the door quietly. "Or did you forget how this started? This isn't about us." She whirled to face him. "This is about Kellen's business, his dreams." "His dreams?" Asher's laugh was cold. "You mean his schemes? His house of cards built on borrowed money and empty promises? He just needed more time." Sloane's voice cracked slightly. "The market would have turned around." "The market isn't the problem, Sloane. Never was." He studied her face, seeing the desperation she was trying to hide. "The problem is you. Your constant pushing for more, your endless demands for a bigger house, fancier cars, better vacations. That's not fair. I never what? Never pushed him to take risks he couldn't afford? Never compared him to others who seemed more successful." He stepped closer. "Sound familiar?" Color drained from her face. "This is revenge, isn't it? For what happened between us?" "No, Sloane. This is karma. You and Kellen did this to yourselves. I just happened to be in a position to watch it happen. We could work something out. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. For old time's sake. I could. Could what? His voice was ice. Try to manipulate me again? Trade on whatever you think is left of my feelings for you. She flinched as if he'd struck her. I thought you loved me once. I did. That was my mistake. He opened the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Work? She laughed bitterly. Still hiding behind your computers while destroying people's lives? No, Sloan. I'm building something real. Something that will last. Unlike your marriage. After she left, Asher returned to his office. His phone was filled with missed calls and messages from Kellen, each more desperate than the last. We can work this out. Name your price. Don't do this to us. He deleted them all without responding. Opening his laptop, he began reviewing the latest reports. Kellen's empire was crumbling faster than expected. The tech company bankruptcy had triggered a cascade of defaults, exposing the house of cards he'd built. That a final text came through from Sloan. You've changed. The Asher I knew would never be this cruel. He smiled grimly as he typed his response, the first and last he would send. The Asher you knew never existed. He was just a story you told yourself to justify your choices. The next morning brought news that Kellen's largest investment property was being foreclosed. By the end of the week, the rest would follow. Through his various shell companies, Asher would acquire it all for pennies on the dollar, sitting in his office. Watching the numbers roll in, Asher felt no triumph, no joy. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that karma had finally caught up with them. They had built their happiness on betrayal and lies, and now they would watch it all crumble. His phone buzzed one last time. Kellen again. He let it go to voicemail, already knowing what it would say. More desperate pleas, more empty promises. But Asher was done listening. He had work to do. The endgame began on a cold winter morning when Asher's lawyer called with the news he'd been waiting for. Everything's in place, the lawyer said. Your shell companies now control over 90% of their outstanding debt. We can move forward whenever you're ready. Asher looked out his office window at the city skyline. Send the notices. All of them. Today. They'll lose everything, his lawyer warned. The house, the cars, all of it. Are you sure you want to? Yes. Asher's voice was firm. It's time they learned what betrayal really costs. Within hours, his phone exploded with calls and messages. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the reports flowing in from his various companies. One by one, the dominoes were falling. Kellen's business empire, built on borrowed money and empty promises, was collapsing under its own weight. The doorbell rang that evening. Asher knew who it would be before he opened it. Kellen stood there, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face haggard. The polished businessman was gone, replaced by a desperate man watching his world crumble. You have to stop this, Kellen's voice cracked. Everything I've built. You mean everything you've borrowed? Asher stepped aside, letting him enter. How's that working out for you? Kellen paced the living room like a caged animal. This isn't about business. This is personal. You're trying to destroy me because of Sloan? No, Kellen. You destroyed yourself. Asher's calm seemed to infuriate his former friend further. I just happened to be in a position to watch it happen. Listen to me. Kellen ran his hands through his disheveled hair. I can still turn this around. I have deals in the works, investors lined up. More promises? More borrowed money? Asher shook his head. That game is over. You smug bastard. Kellen's face twisted with rage. You think you're better than me? Sitting here with your computers and your quiet little life? Asher smiled thinly. My quiet little life that just bought out all your debt. That quiet little life? The color drained from Kellen's face. What are you talking about? Those shell companies that have been buying up your loans? The ones calling in their debts? Asher's voice was ice. They're all mine. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money, don't I? Asher walked to his laptop, pulled up his investment portfolio. Want to see what a quiet little life really looks like? Kellen stared at the screen, his mouth working soundlessly as he processed the numbers. All this time, you were building something real, Asher finished. Not just putting on a show with borrowed money. We can work something out. Kellen's voice turned desperate. Partners like old times. I could. Partners? Asher's laugh was cold. Like when you went after my wife? That was different. Sloan and I, we love each other. You have to understand. I understand perfectly. Asher moved toward the door. You're a fraud, Kellen. Always have been. The only difference is now everyone else will know it too. Please, Kellen's voice cracked. Don't do this to us. To Sloan. To Sloan? Asher opened the door. The woman who thought I was beneath her? Who walked away because my ambitions weren't big enough? He gestured for Kellen to leave. Actions have consequences. It's time you both learned that. After Kellen left, Asher received a text from Sloan. We need to talk. Please. One last time. He considered ignoring it, but something in the message's desperation made him respond. Tomorrow. My office. 10 a.m. The next morning, Sloan arrived exactly on time. Her designer outfit a sharp contrast to her pale, drawn face. I know what you're doing, she said without preamble. Using your companies to buy our debt. Force us into bankruptcy. Impressive. Asher didn't look up from his computer. You finally learned to pay attention to business details. This isn't business. This is revenge. Now he did look up. No, Sloan. This is karma. Everything you're losing, you took from someone else first. I never took anything from you, she protested. You were the one who what? Asher's voice was sharp. Who worked quietly building real wealth while you complained about appearances. Who invested wisely while you chased status. I didn't know, she whispered. About the money, the investments. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? He studied her face. Or would you still have run off with my best friend because he made bigger promises? Tears welled in her eyes. We can fix this. Start over. I see now what I gave up. No. The word fell like a stone. You see what you're losing. There's a difference. Please. She moved closer to his desk. For what we once had, we had nothing. Asher's voice was ice. You made that very clear when you walked away. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have foreclosure notices to sign. She stared at him for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. You've changed? No, Sloan. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bothered to look past the surface. He turned back to his computer. You can see yourself out. After she left, Asher pulled up the final documentation his lawyer had prepared. Everything was in place. By the end of the week, Kellen and Sloan's carefully constructed world would lie in ruins. His phone buzzed with a message from his broker. Mitchell's tech company assets being liquidated tomorrow. Want first rights? Asher smiled grimly as he typed his response. The endgame was moving faster than he'd expected, but that was fine. He was ready. The foreclosure notices arrived at Kellen and Sloan's mansion on a Thursday morning. By afternoon, their phones were ringing nonstop with calls from creditors, banks, and increasingly anxious business partners. Their carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Brick by expensive brick, Asher watched it unfold from his office, receiving regular updates from his lawyers. The bankruptcy trustees had moved quickly, seizing assets and freezing accounts. Everything Kellen and Sloan had built, or rather, borrowed, was being dismantled. His intercom buzzed. Sir, Mr. Mitchell is here. He's quite insistent. Send him in. Kellen burst through the door, waving papers. What the hell is this? Foreclosure? Asset seizure? You can't do this. Actually, Asher replied calmly, I can. And I am. The house. Kellen's voice cracked. You're taking our house? Technically, the bank is taking it. I just happen to own the debt. Asher looked up from his computer. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Funny. Kellen slammed his fists on the desk. You're destroying everything we've built. No, I'm exposing everything you've borrowed. Asher remained seated, unruffled. There's a difference. Listen to me. Kellen's voice turned desperate. Give me 30 days. Just 30 days to raise the capital. I have investors. More promises? Asher shook his head. That game is over, Kellen. Time to face reality. Reality? Kellen laughed bitterly. The reality is you're doing this because you're jealous. Because Sloan chose me over you. Chose you? Now Asher did stand. You mean betrayed me. Both of you. We fell in love. These things happen. Save it. Asher's voice was ice. You're not in love. You're in debt. And now everyone will know it. The door burst open again. Sloane stood there, mascara streaked down her face. The cars, she gasped. They just took our cars. Already? Asher checked his watch. They're ahead of schedule. You bastard, she whispered. How could you do this to us? To you? Asher's laugh was cold. That's rich, coming from the woman who walked away because I wasn't ambitious enough. I was wrong. Sloane moved closer, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I see that now. You were building something real while we were just putting on a show. Too late for that realization, isn't it? Please, she reached for his hand. We could start over. I know now what I gave up. Asher pulled his hand away. What you gave up? You mean what you threw away? What you betrayed? We can fix this, Kellen interrupted. All of us. Together. Like old times. Old times? Asher turned to his former friend. You mean when you were sleeping with my wife behind my back? Those old times? That's not fair, Sloane protested. We never meant to. To what? Get caught? Face consequences. Asher walked to the window. Well, here they are. The consequences you never thought would come. His phone buzzed with a message from his lawyer. Luxury items being repossessed now. Moving team en route to the house. You should go home, he told them. The movers will need access to collect everything. Everything? Sloane's voice was small. What do you mean everything? The furniture, the art, the designer clothes all bought with borrowed money. Asher turned back to them. Time to return what was never really yours. Where are we supposed to go? Kellen demanded. What are we supposed to do? Not my problem. Asher sat back down at his desk. Maybe try living within your means for once. Sloane moved to his side, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know you still have feelings for me. Deep down you must what? He cut her off. Still love you? Still want you? His laugh was bitter. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about feelings. It's about justice. Justice? Kellen scoffed. You mean revenge? Call it what you want. Asher turned back to his computer. The result's the same. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Work? Sloane's voice turned sharp. Still hiding behind your computers while destroying people's lives? No. Asher met her gaze steadily. Building something real. Something that will last. Unlike your marriage. Another message lit up his phone. Moving trucks arrived at the Mitchell residence. Proceedings beginning. You should go, he told them. Unless you want to watch strangers pack up your life from my office. They stood there. These two people who had once meant everything to him, now reduced to desperate shadows of their former selves. Kellen's confident swagger was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and shaking hands. Sloane's perfect facade had cracked, revealing the frightened woman beneath. This isn't over. Kellen tried to sound threatening, but his voice shook. Actually, it is. Asher didn't look up. It was over the moment you decided to betray me. You just didn't know it yet. After they left, Asher pulled up the final reports from his lawyers. Everything was proceeding according to plan. By nightfall, Kellen and Sloane's empire of borrowed luxury would be dismantled completely. His phone buzzed one last time, a text from Sloane. I never meant for it to end like this. Asher typed his response carefully. Yes, you did. You just expected to be the one walking away. The final confrontation came on a bitter winter evening as Kellen and Sloane packed the last of their personal belongings from the mansion they could no longer afford. Asher drove there himself, wanting to witness the moment when their perfect world finally shattered completely. The house stood dark against the twilight sky, moving trucks still parked in the circular driveway. Workers carried out designer furniture and expensive art pieces, all to be sold to pay down the mountain of debt Kellen had accumulated. Asher found them in what had once been their luxurious living room, now empty except for a few boxes and scattered papers. Sloane sat on a cardboard box, her once perfect makeup streaked with tears. Kellen paced the room, his phone pressed to his ear. Listen to me, he was saying, his voice desperate. There has to be something left, some account we haven't tried. He stopped when he saw Asher. I'll call you back. Come to gloat. Sloane's voice was hollow. No. Asher stepped into the room, looking around at the bare walls where expensive paintings had hung. Come to make sure you understand exactly why this happened. Oh, we understand, Kellen spat. You couldn't stand seeing us happy, seeing us successful. Successful. Asher's laugh was sharp. Is that what you call drowning in debt? Living on borrowed money and empty promises? We had a life here. Sloane stood, her designer dress wrinkled and worn. A beautiful life. You had an illusion, Asher corrected, built on betrayal and lies. Now reality has caught up. Kellen moved toward him, fists clenched. You engineered this. Used your money to buy our debt. Force us into bankruptcy. And where did that money come from? Asher's voice was cold. The same work you both mocked. The same little computer job you thought was beneath you. I never meant, Sloane began. Never meant what? Asher cut her off. Never meant to get caught? Never meant to face consequences? We can still fix this, Kellen tried. Work something out? The three of us? The three of us? Asher's voice dripped contempt. Like when you were sleeping with my wife behind my back. Planning your perfect life together while laughing at my expense. That wasn't how it happened. Sloane protested. We fell in love. Love. Asher turned to her. Is that what you call it? Trading up for someone you thought could give you a better lifestyle? I was wrong about you, she whispered. I see that now. All this time, you were building something real while we were just what? Living beyond your means? Putting on a show. He gestured around the empty room. Well, the show's over. A moving worker appeared in the doorway. Sir, we need to take this last box. Wait. Sloane grabbed for it. That's my jewelry. All bought with borrowed money. Asher reminded her. Time to pay it back. She sank back onto another box, tears flowing freely now. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? Not my concern. Asher's voice was ice. Maybe try living honestly for once. You've changed, Kellen said quietly. The Asher I knew would never be this cruel. The Asher you knew never existed. He turned to face his former friend. He was just a convenient target for your mockery, a stepping stone on your way to what you thought was success. Please, Sloane stood, moving closer to him. We can start over. I know now what I threw away. No, the word fell like a stone. You're only sorry because you lost everything. If your schemes had worked, if Kellen's business gambles had paid off, you'd still be looking down on me and my small ambitions. That's not true, she protested. I've changed. I understand now. Understand what? That appearances aren't everything? That real success comes from hard work, not borrowed money. He shook his head. Too late for those lessons, don't you think? The last moving truck started up outside, engine rumbling in the gathering darkness. Soon they would have to leave this house, this monument to their greed and betrayal, forever. You taught me something valuable, Asher said quietly. Both of you did. What's that? Kellen asked bitterly. That appearances matter more than loyalty. He looked between them. Now you've lost both. Asher, wait. Sloane reached for his arm as he turned to leave. There must be something, some way. He pulled away from her touch. Goodbye, Sloane. Goodbye, Kellen. Try not to borrow your way into another disaster. Walking out of the house, Asher felt no triumph, no joy in their downfall. Only a quiet satisfaction that karma had finally caught up with them. They had built their happiness on betrayal and lies, and now they would face the consequences of those choices. In the months that followed, Asher focused on his work, growing his empire larger than ever. He invested in causes that mattered to him, building something lasting and real. Sometimes he heard rumors about Kellen and Sloane, their divorce, their separate struggles to rebuild their lives from nothing, but he never reached out, never responded to their occasional desperate messages. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. They had made their choices, and now they would live with them. Sitting in his office one evening, watching the city lights twinkle below, Asher reflected on how far he'd come. Not just in terms of wealth or success, but in understanding himself. He didn't need flashy displays or constant validation. Real power, real success, came from building something genuine, something that would last. His phone buzzed with a final message from Sloane. I know now what I lost. What we both lost. Asher deleted it without responding. Some lessons came too late to matter.